Before we start, a quick note about what this channel is and what it isn't. This isn't a recap channel, and it's not a highlight reel. We're here for the parts of Panem that happen after the cameras turn away, the systems behind the games, the contracts hidden inside victory, the lives that keep unfolding long after the anthem ends. Each video on this channel is built to slow things down, to follow the logic the Capital relies on, the details it hopes you won't connect, and the people who live with the consequences year after year. If that's the kind of Hunger Games analysis you're looking for, you're in the right place. Subscribing just means you'll keep a seat here when we move on to the next story. Now, let's start where Panem always wants you to stop paying attention. There's a boy standing in the rain behind a bakery. He is holding burnt bread. At face value, this is the softest moment in the Hunger Games. A kind boy accidentally ruins a loaf, takes a beating for it, and tosses it to a starving girl in the mud. It reads as pure compassion, no strategy, no games, just mercy in a grey District 12 alley. But here's the real question. What if that ruined bread is our first clue that Peeta Mellark is already thinking in terms of optics, timing, and risk? You remember the details. His mother screams, hits him, sends him outside with the charred loaves. The rain is coming down hard. Katniss is close enough to see everything from under the pig shed. And Peeta doesn't just drop the bread in the trash. He glances toward her. He hesitates. Then he throws the loaves just close enough that she can reach them without crawling to his back door and getting both of them in trouble. That part matters because this isn't a random act flung into the void. It's a calibrated move made in full view of witnesses and security patterns he's grown up under. So here's the question. What if the boy who throws bread isn't just nice, but is already testing how far he can bend Capital rules without getting caught? He knows stealing is punishable. He knows waste is suspicious in a district built on scarcity. Yet he chooses a method that gives him plausible deniability. Burnt bread can be written off as an accident. Tossing it to the pigs is normal. Tossing it near a starving girl is only dangerous if someone decides to read intent. We've been trained to see Katniss as the strategist and Peeta as the heart. She hunts, she calculates, she volunteers. He decorates cakes and smiles on cue. So why do his first major choices keep rewriting the rules of the story while she's still trying to survive the day? This is where we talk about narrative control. From that first loaf, Peeta is experimenting with a relationship between risk and visibility. How much can he do in plain sight and still pass as harmless? Here's the real question. Has Peeta been quietly steering the narrative while everyone watches Katniss's bow? He looks like the least threatening person in any room, the boy the Capital would never bother to fear. Yet he's the one who will later hijack Caesar Flickerman's interview stage, drop the star-crossed lover's bomb, and force the games to package him and Katniss as a single inseparable product. There is a lot to uncover here. Across all three books, Peeta keeps making the single most game-changing public moves. The bread, the confession, the Berry's performance he has to support, the proposal on live television, even the way he fights through hijacking to warn about the final bombing. Each time he plays into the role of victim or romantic, and each time that role gives him cover to slip a knife into the Capital's script. So in this video, we're going to cover whether Peeta is really the soft boy we remember, or a long-game strategist hiding in plain sight. Because when you track his choices from that rain-soaked alley to the hijacking recovery room, he starts to look less like someone the Capitol broke and more like someone who has been playing an incredibly dangerous game from the very first burnt loaf. And if that's true, then the bread wasn't just charity, it was his opening move. Why Peeta's strategy actually decides who lives and who burns. So if the bread was his opening move, this is where we talk about what game he's actually playing. At face value, you experience the first games the way Katniss does. Tunnel vision, trees, thirst, tracker jackers. Peeta is background noise until he isn't. The boy with the bread, the boy with the bruise, the boy who keeps saying he'll die so she can live. You read him as emotional support, as the softer half of the duo, while your brain files the real danger under mutts and fireballs. But here's the real question. While Katniss is in survival mode, what is Peeta doing to the arena outside the arena? His first big move isn't in the woods, it's in that Reaping to Games window on live television, when he drops the crush on Katniss bomb. On the surface, that's romance. Underneath, it's a political trap. He forces the Capitol to package them as a matched set, a promise of star-crossed hope the districts can project themselves onto. Kill one, and you don't just lose a tribute. You lose a narrative the whole country has already bought into. That part matters because suddenly sponsor money doesn't just follow who's lethal, it follows who's compelling. District morale spikes every time Caesar Flickerman replays their hand-holding. The Capitol's propaganda machine is locked into a love story it can't easily pivot away from without admitting the games are rigged. Snow now has to factor Peeta into his personal strategy toward District 12, not as a random baker's son, but as half of a symbol he can't fully control. So why does Snow care so much about that love story? Why not just have them both die in some tragic, ratings-friendly blaze? Why does the rebellion keep broadcasting Peeta's face even when he's hijacked and actively undermining Katniss? And why, at the very end, does Coin look at this gentle, traumatized Victor and still see a threat to her new order? The reason is that Peeta understands something most tributes never get the chance to learn. The games don't end at the cannon. Winning is stage 1. Stage 2 is what your image does when you go home. We're going to cover the victory tour later, but notice how quickly he weaponizes his role there. Public proposal. Carefully chosen words about the baby. Every performance is a shield over District 12, a pressure point on Snow, and a signal boost to any district paying attention. And here's the twist. The thing everyone reads as his weakness, his constant willingness to sacrifice himself, might be his most dangerous tool. If you keep insisting you're expendable, who's going to read you as a long-term strategist? Katniss trusts him more because he keeps trying to give her the win. The Capitol underestimates him because he keeps offering them the tragic lover boy ending they already want. So what happens when the one person everyone thinks is safe to ignore is the one quietly deciding who lives, who burns, and which symbol survives the fire? Our thesis: Peeta as long-game narrative engineer, not passive love interest. So this is where we talk about the actual thesis. If Peeta's the one quietly deciding who lives and which symbol survives, what does that make him? Not a background love interest, a narrative engineer. Here's the real question. What if Peeta's core survival skill isn't strength or stealth, but authorship? Our claim is that Peeta isn't just reacting to whatever horror the Capitol throws at him. He's constantly choosing moves that reshape the story everyone else has to tell about him and Katniss. From the moment his name is called at the Reaping, he's not asking, "How do I win the games?" He's asking, "How do I control the version of us the Capitol can't kill without consequences?" At face value, playing the long game sounds like some three-book chessboard where Peter's plotting Mockingjay in Chapter 1. That's not what we're arguing. The long game here is about thinking past immediate survival into narrative, legacy, and public perception. He's the kid on the rooftop talking about wanting to die as himself, which sounds poetic, but that part matters because it tells you his metric for victory isn't just breathing. It's how the story of his death or his survival will be used by the Capitol, by his district, by Katniss. So why does that matter in Panem? Because the games are already a story machine. Snow understands that a controlled narrative is more powerful than any mutation. Peeta just plays that same game from the other side. His strengths map perfectly onto that battlefield. He reads crowds in a heartbeat. He walks into Caesar Flickerman's interview and turns a standard PR segment into a narrative bomb. The crush on Katniss reveal forces the Capitol to package them as a matched set. Sponsors, game makers, even other tributes now have to see them as a unit, which makes killing one of them a political question, not just a tactical decision. We're going to cover the receipts later, but watch how he controls tone. He knows when to lean into humor, when to look broken, when to weaponize vulnerability so the audience feels complicit in his pain. That's not random softness. In a system where brute force and archery win you a battle, Peter's emotional fluency wins him a constituency. His kindness is real, but it's also deliberate, targeted, and timed to change the rules of the games themselves. And no, we're not secretly arguing that Peeta is some hidden, ruthless mastermind. The point is sharper than that. He refuses to play the Capitol's game of cruelty, but he absolutely plays the game of optics. He'll volunteer his own death over and over, not because he has a death wish, but because I'm expendable is the one position the Capitol can't easily exploit. It traps Katniss in a relationship with hope and guilt, and it traps Snow in a love story he helped broadcast. There is a lot to uncover here. The first interview, the alliance with the careers, the Victory Tour proposal, the hijacking, and finally, real or not real, as the ultimate long game move to reclaim his story from Capitol propaganda. So how do all those moments look when you stop seeing Peeta as passive and start reading him as the quiet author of the rebellion's most powerful narrative? Where we're going, from bread to real or not real, so to really test this Peeta as long game strategist idea, we need a map. Because his story doesn't just jump from bread in the rain to real or not real on a hospital bed. There is a lot to uncover here, and it unfolds in phases. First, we're going to cover the pre-game's groundwork. That means the bread, the reaping, and especially that first interview. At face value, I've Had a Crush on You plays a sweet, awkward romance. But here's the real question. What happens when a tribute detonates a love story on live television before the games even start? We'll break down how that one confession forces the Capitol to sell them as a matched set, and why that part matters, because it quietly raises the political cost of killing either one of them. Then we move into the first arena where Peeta does the most controversial thing he ever does. He joins the careers? Is this betrayal, or is this where we talk about game board awareness? We'll track how he feeds the misinformation about Katniss, how he stages his own death, and how the romance becomes a survival tactic once the rule change hits. We'll ask, if you assume he's 3 moves ahead, does that alliance stop being cowardly and start looking surgical? From there, we escalate with Catching Fire. The quarter quail twist rips away the promise that a victor is ever safe, but watch what Peeta does with that. We'll dissect the rooftop conversation as his manifesto about narrative control. The boy who doesn't just want to live, but to control how his story is used. Then we hit the interview baby bomb. Why announce a pregnancy on Caesar's stage? We'll treat it as a tactical nuke against the game's legitimacy, turning the audience's horror into pressure on Snow. Parallel to that, we'll track the victory tour. Peeta's proposal in the districts, his speeches, the way he keeps trying to redirect attention from spectacle to suffering. This is where we talk about post-games propaganda. How much of the rebellion's hope is smuggled in under the cover of a love story the Capitol thinks it owns? All along, we'll keep comparing book Peeta to movie Peeta. The films often sand down his interior strategy and make him look more passive. But we'll point out the moments they quietly preserve his edge. The way he reads a crowd, the timing of his public stands, the small beats where you can see him calculating even when he's framed as just the romantic one. And near the end, we'll run a speculative experiment. What if you replay the hijacking the real or not real game and key Mockingjay scenes assuming Peeta is consciously playing the Capitol and even coin 3 moves ahead? Does the rebellion still work without that long game, or does the entire Mockingjay myth collapse without the baker's son quietly steering the narrative from start to finish? That's our roadmap. Now let's start at the beginning. The bread, the rain, and a boy who decides that the first move in his rebellion is kindness. Welcome to Victor's Village. Why this channel obsessively rereads Panem. So before we follow that boy with the bread into the rain, we need to talk about where we're standing. Because this channel, this is Victor's Village, not the glossy Capitol brochure version. The real one. The one where a bunch of over-caffeinated victors sit on their porches, stare at those perfect hedges, and gossip about why the games are built the way they are. We're going to cover the architecture, the politics, the trauma, and the weird little character choices that make Panem feel uncomfortably real. If you're new here and you've ever paused the movie just to squint at Snow's garden layout, or wondered why Peeta's interview strategy works on an entire country, you're in the right district. At face value, this story is about kids in an arena. But here's the real question. Why does every choice, from the shape of a mansion to the angle of a camera, feed back into control, into the promise of hope, into who gets remembered as a hero or a threat? This is where we talk about systems, not just what happened, but why the Capitol needs Victor's Village, why they need those victory tours, why they need Peeta on a train rehearsing a proposal instead of screaming about the bodies he stepped over. That part matters because the games aren't a one-time event, they're a lifelong contract. You don't stop being a tribute when the cannon fires for the last time. You just change arenas. So when we obsess over Peeta, we're not doing a recap, we're treating him as a player who understands the board. The boy who turns a crushed confession into a national storyline. The victor who uses wedding dresses and interviews as weapons. We're interested in how he hacks the games from the inside how he bends propaganda until it starts to crack, and what that says about power, trauma, and relationship dynamics under a dictatorship. If that's the kind of thing you want more of, deep dives into Coin's endgame, Haymitch's secret rebellion role, or why Snow puts a direct phone line in a lonely house on a hill, consider moving into this little digital village with us so you don't miss the next breakdown. We're basically the nosy neighbors who never stop asking why. Pattern interrupt for a second. Imagine a mentor walking you through your new Victor's village house. Only instead of pointing out the wine cellar, they're pointing out every camera angle, every scripted speech, every way the capital will try to own your narrative. That's how we're going to walk through Peter's story from here on, room by room, choice by choice, starting back where we left him, in the rain with the bread, making his very first move against the capital without ever raising a weapon. The bread incident, first move in a lifelong game of optics. So let's step back into that rain. You're with Katniss, soaked, starving, pressed up against the back of the bakery. Her father is dead, her mother is gone in her own head. The games haven't touched her yet, but the district has already done its work. She's at the edge of giving up. Then there's Peeta Mellark, inside the warm glow of the ovens, on the other side of the glass. At face value, the scene reads as a random act of kindness. He burns the loaves, gets slapped by his mother in front of everyone, and then throws the ruined bread to the pigs, just a little too wide so it lands within Katniss's reach. It feels messy, impulsive, almost accidental. But here's the real question. How accidental can anything be when you've grown up in a place where stealing a loaf of bread can literally get you killed? This is where we talk about audience. Who's actually watching this moment? His mother is. The other workers, anyone passing in the square is. And Peter knows Katniss is out there because he's noticed her at school, he's noticed the singing, he's noticed the way she moves through the district. There is a lot to uncover here in terms of who this performance is for. If he simply hands her bread, that's theft. That's intent. In a district where public whippings happen and death is always the implied punishment, that's a direct challenge to the rules. But if he ruins the bread first, if he makes a visible mistake that his mother punishes, then tosses it away as trash, now he's not stealing, he's wastefully obedient. The capital's laws are technically intact, even if the spirit of them is not. So why burn the loaves at all? Why not just sneak something out later? The reason is optics. The slap is part of the cover story. The yelling is part of the alibi. He creates a scene that explains why this food ends up in the mud without anyone needing to ask further questions. He's doing risk calculus in real time. How do you divert resources in a surveillance culture without leaving a trail that can be weaponized against you? And here's where the long game comes in. No, Peter doesn't know he'll share an arena with Katniss, but he does know the basic math of human relationship and story. You save someone from starvation, you don't just keep a person alive. You create a narrative. You create a promise. In a world built on the games, where every victor is turned into a walking story, that part matters, because stories are currency. So this muddy, miserable moment becomes his first investment. A quiet rebellion that doesn't read as rebellion. A compassionate move that doubles as a future asset. Hope literally thrown at her feet. And once you see that, you start to notice a pattern. because the next time Peeta knows he's being watched, it won't just be a few townspeople and a furious baker. It'll be the entire nation tuned in, waiting to hear him talk about a certain girl from District 12, the reaping. Why Peeta doesn't volunteer and why that's strategic. So when we cut back to the reaping, you have to rewind your brain a little, because now that you've seen Peeta turn a tossed loaf of bread into a long-term investment, you have to ask, what does it mean that he doesn't stand up and volunteer? At face value, it reads as passivity. Gale would never. Katniss only volunteers because Prim's name is called, and even then the crowd reacts like they've witnessed a glitch in the system. That part matters because District 12 is not a career district. In 1, 2, and 4, volunteering is practically a sport. You train your whole childhood for the games and then shove each other aside to get on stage. In 12, the culture is resignation. You dread the reaping, you pray it's not you, and if it is, you walk up shaking. So here's the real question. What would it signal if the baker's son suddenly broke that pattern? We're going to cover why that's not just a personal choice, it's a political one. Peeta isn't a starving seam kid, but he's also not part of any local elite. His family has marginal stability, a little status, and a front row view of how the district actually works. He's comfortable enough to see the system clearly, but nowhere near powerful enough to rewrite its rituals without consequences. If he volunteered, he'd be making a statement District 12 has no script for. Imagine that stage, Effie Trinket, the cameras, the peacekeepers, and then some boy from the bakery just raises his hand. The Capitol would notice. The peacekeepers would remember his face. The district would whisper about what his family thinks they are now. There is a lot to uncover here about class and optics. Snow's whole game depends on predictability. 12 is supposed to produce terrified, unlucky tributes, not ambitious gladiators. By not volunteering, Peeta stays inside the emotional baseline of his district. He's just another unlucky name in a rigged lottery. That keeps him relatable to his people, but more importantly, it keeps him unremarkable to the Capitol. When Haymitch later sells him as the boy in love, it lands because the foundation is already there. This isn't a career who trained for glory. This is a soft-spoken kid who bakes bread and got swept up in a tragic romance. Now flip it. Imagine Snow hearing that District 12 produced a male volunteer who can throw 100-pound sacks of flour and wrestle with the girl on the training mats. That's not a love story. That's a threat. A career-style tribute from the coal district breaks the narrative the Capitol depends on, and threats get neutralized early, long before they can promise any real hope to the districts watching. This is where we talk about underestimation as strategy. Peeta's real power comes from being misread. The reaping is his first crucial chance to protect that misread. By staying seated, by letting his name be pulled instead of claimed, he preserves the illusion he'll later weaponize on stage. Harmless, romantic, expendable. And the next time he steps into a spotlight, he's going to cash in on that illusion in a way that rewires the entire game's narrative. Train ride confessions, Peeta's rooftop philosophy as strategy manifesto. So when we finally get Peeta on the Capitol train rooftop, this is not some moody teen having an existential crisis under the stars. It's a mission briefing. On the surface, the scene feels soft. He tells Katniss he doesn't want the games to change him, that if he's going to die, He wants to die as himself, not as another capital piece. At face value, you read that as noble, maybe even naive. He sounds like the one person in the arena who hasn't accepted the rules. But here's the real question. What kind of person, on the eve of state-sanctioned murder, is already talking about authorship and ownership instead of weapons and odds? This is where we talk about his line. I keep wishing I could think of a way to show the capital they don't own me. That part matters because it's not about survival at all. It's about spectacle. He's not saying, I wish I could win. He's saying, I wish I could stage something. He's already thinking in terms of an audience, a message, and a move that plays through the cameras straight into every district home. In other words, he's outlining a content strategy before the games have even started. There is a lot to uncover here. That sentence is basically his mission statement for what we're going to cover in the rest of his arc, using the game's own narrative engine against the capital. Once you clock that, his later choices stop looking random or purely emotional. The rooftop talk is Peeta workshopping the brand. Not killer, not rebel soldier, but something the capital can't easily weaponize without also undermining itself. Watch how that rooftop philosophy mutates into concrete tactics. In the interviews, he drops the I've had a crush on Katniss reveal, and everyone treats it as this spontaneous romantic confession. But he's doing exactly what he promised, forcing the capital to frame him as a devoted partner, a romantic hero, the boy who would do anything for the girl on fire. Why is that smart? Because once the game's narrative locks them in as star-crossed lovers, it becomes politically messy to kill one without the other. The capital has to protect its own story, and he keeps doing it. Aligning with the careers, then turning on them, publicly protecting Katniss in the arena, then on the victory tour. Over and over he chooses roles that make him the moral center in front of the cameras, even when he's physically the weakest victor in the room. He's curating how the districts will remember him, and by extension, what kind of story they'll accept about the games themselves. So you have to ask, who is he really talking to on that rooftop? Katniss, or the future audience he knows is always watching? He's thinking beyond the arena, beyond this specific games, into legacy and leverage. If this is his stated goal before the bloodbath even begins, what does that imply about how accidental his later interview bombs and public proposals really are? Because if the promise is, die as myself, every smile on stage after this point might actually be a move on a much longer board. The interview bomb, I've had a crush on you, as tactical nuke. So when we cut from that rooftop promise to the interview stage, you already know Peeta isn't walking out there blind. The arena hasn't even started, but in his head, the games have. You've got Caesar Flickerman in his electric blue suit, the capital audience buzzing, and this ritual everyone understands. Tributes come out, they're charming, they spin, they cry, they promise to try their best, and then they die for entertainment. At face value, the interviews are fluff, sparkle before slaughter. But here's the real question. If Peeta's whole thing is die as myself, why lean into the most artificial part of the pre-game circus? Why play along at all? He's hijacking the script. When Peeta drops, I've had a crush on you since forever on live television, it lands as this huge romantic twist. The audience screams, Caesar milks it, and Katniss sits there genuinely blindsided. There is a lot to uncover here. On the surface, it's a boy confessing feelings before probable death. Underneath, it's a tactical nuke aimed directly at how the Capitol expects to consume these two tributes. Remember how the interviews usually work. Each tribute is their own mini-show. Funny one, tragic one, angry one. The Capitol can cheer for a favorite, but there's still individual pieces to move and discard. What Peeta does is fuse two slots on the board into one storyline. Suddenly, you don't just have Katniss, the girl on fire, and Peeta, the baker's son. You have a relationship, star-crossed lovers from the same district. That part matters because once the Capitol frames you as a romantic narrative, killing you stops being clean spectacle and starts being bad PR. If one dies brutally while the other watches, that's not just sad, that's a tragedy with a face, a promise broken in front of millions. Snow understands the danger of that kind of hope and that kind of grief. And notice the timing. Peeta never tells Katniss beforehand. Why? Because her confusion, her anger, the way she shoves him later on the rooftop, all of that sells authenticity to viewers and sponsors. You can't fake that kind of reaction. We're going to cover how often Peeta uses truth as camouflage, but this is the prototype, a real crush deployed in a way that bends the game's narrative around both of them. Strategically, it's brilliant. By making them a package deal, he buys them extra protection and sponsor interest. Medicine for one now reads as mercy for two. Gifts become investments in a story the Capitol doesn't want to see end too soon. So the question becomes, is this just a doomed boy blurting out his heart, or is it the first clear moment where Peeta weaponizes his own vulnerability against a hostile system? And if this is his opening move, what happens when the Capitol forces that romance to continue long after the arena is supposed to be over? Reading the room, Peeta's sponsor game and crowd control. If that confession is the opening move, then Peeta's next trick is figuring out who's actually watching. Because in Panem, you're never just talking to Caesar Flickerman, you're talking to sponsors, to Snow, to your own district, and to every scared kid whose name might be in the bowl next year. Katniss walks into that world and immediately short circuits. She freezes, she glares, she gives one-word answers because the whole spectacle feels like another arena. At face value, that awkwardness reads as authenticity, and the Capitol eats it up for a while. But you can feel her fighting the performance. Every second, Peeta does the opposite. He leans in. He jokes about the bread. He tells stories about the pig with the apple. He lets Caesar interrupt him and rolls with it. He modulates his tone so it feels spontaneous, while still giving the Capitol exactly the shape of emotion it wants. Here's the real question. Why does that matter more than just being charming? Because sponsor gifts are never just popularity points. They're narrative investments. A sponsor isn't sending you burn ointment. They're casting a vote that your story should continue. Peeta understands that if he can make himself the center of a compelling story, tragic boy in love, noble protector, self-sacrificing victor, then killing him becomes bad television and bad politics. This is where we talk about his self-deprecating humor. Peeta constantly positions himself as the butt of the joke. He's the boy who trips in the mud, the one who has no chance against the careers, the one who says Katniss is far too good for him. That part matters because it disarms people. It lets Capitol audiences feel superior and safe. You're not threatened by Peeta Mellark. You're entertained by him. And while they relax, he quietly steers the conversation toward the romance, toward partnership, toward the idea that Katniss and Peeta are a matched set. Pattern interrupt. Notice who sees this first. It's not Snow, it's Haymitch. The drunk in the decayed Victor's house is actually the one running PR calculus in real time. He realizes Katniss's rawness is the emotional hook, but she can't or won't sell it. Peeta can. So we're going to cover how Haymitch splits the roles. Peeta becomes the public face, the smooth narrative, the speech and the smile, while Katniss is the unpredictable spark that makes the whole thing feel dangerous and real. Once you notice that, Peeta's long game snaps into focus. Whether he's on a capital stage, in a district square during the victory tour, or later in a rebel war room arguing about strategy in Mockingjay, he's always reading the room. He knows when to promise hope, when to beg, when to provoke, when to undercut himself so other people will say the dangerous thing for him. And that raises a bigger question for the endgame. If his greatest weapon is understanding what every audience needs to hear, what happens when those audiences finally turn on each other? Joining the careers, betrayal or deep cover operation. So when those audiences finally turn on each other, what does Peeta do? He walks straight into the mouth of the beast. You remember the shot. Katniss is up in the tree, half starved, half feral, and then the torchlight hits his face. Peeta, standing with the career pack. At face value, it plays as the cleanest narrative the games can offer. The soft baker's boy traded up, chose power over his district partner, and sold her out for a full belly and a better chance at becoming a victor. But here's the real question. Does that move actually make sense if Peeta's goal is just survival? Or does it make a lot more sense if he's running the same rooftop philosophy just on hard mode? If you can't break the system from outside, you infiltrate it and start quietly bending its resources toward your own agenda. This is where we talk about practical benefits, because there is a lot to uncover here. By joining the careers, Peeta gets instant access to their food, weapons, and, most importantly, their plans. He hears their patrol routes. He watches how they respond to cannon fire. He learns which tributes they're afraid of and which ones they underestimate. That part matters because information is the only currency that can compete with brute strength in the arena. And suddenly, the weakest-looking tribute from District 12 is sitting in the middle of the game's most powerful alliance. Listening. Meanwhile, what's he doing with that access? He's not just surviving, he's curating what they know about Katniss. When they ask about her, he downplays her archery, sells her as a decent hunter who got lucky with a bow, not the girl who can thread a squirrel's eye at 50 yards. He nudges them toward the idea that she'll run, that she's scared, that she's probably hiding somewhere obvious. And we see the result. They comb the woods, they guard the career's stash, but they never systematically flush out the high ground where Katniss actually thrives. Even his help us find her act is misdirection. He leads them to the tree, sure, but he times it so she's already climbed, already out of reach, buying her hours while they waste energy throwing spears and debating whether to wait her out. That's not a clean betrayal, that's controlled exposure. Just enough danger to keep his cover intact, not enough to actually deliver the kill. So why let her think it's real? Why accept the look on her face, that total collapse of trust? Because for Peeta, the relationship isn't just emotional, it's strategic. Maintaining his deep cover role means protecting her long-term, even if she hates him short-term. And that raises one more question. If he's willing to sacrifice her faith in him inside the arena, how far ahead is he already thinking about the games, the capital, and what comes after both of them walk out alive? The riverbank and the cave, self-sacrifice as a power move. So when we hit the riverbank, we finally see how far ahead Peeta's been thinking. He doesn't just get injured, he chooses his role in the scene. At face value, Peeta stumbling out to shout Katniss's name while Kato is nearby looks impulsive, almost stupid. Why draw attention when you're bleeding out? But here's the real question. Why does the boy who reads crowds better than anyone suddenly forget how visibility works? The answer is he doesn't. He weaponizes it. By sending Katniss away and making himself the loud, obvious target, Peeta is doing two things at once. First, he's rerouting the game board. Kato, the most dangerous tribute, is now chasing the dying baker instead of the girl on fire. Second, he's locking Katniss into a promise. If she runs because he tells her to, she's accepting a debt. Survival now comes attached to him. That part matters because it bleeds straight into the cave. This is where we talk about the romantic scenes as something much colder under the surface. Peeta doesn't just lie there waiting for Katniss to save him. He frames himself as already gone. I don't want you to forget me. On paper, that's a tender line. In context, it's a negotiation. He's saying, I've already paid the price. I've offered my life. What are you going to do with that? Katniss is suddenly stuck in a three-way relationship. Her, Peeta, and the audience. To the Capitol, every touch becomes content. To the sponsors, every kiss is a transaction. Peeta understands this. He leans into the role of the doomed lover, which does two things. It makes Katniss's care for him a survival tactic, and it turns that care into an emotional obligation she can't easily walk away from once the games end. When he pressures the star-crossed lover's angle, remember, we're madly in love, so it's all right to kiss me anytime you feel like it. It's not just flirting. It's a reminder that their shared value to the Capitol depends on her playing along. If she drops the act, they both become less useful, less protected, less funded. He's not only asking for affection, he's asking her to keep them both alive by maintaining the story. And here's the twist. By positioning himself as expendable, Peeta actually gains moral authority. He's always the one willing to die. That gives him quiet leverage. How do you argue with the person who keeps offering to pay the highest price? You don't. You adjust your choices around them. Once you see that pattern in the riverbank and the cave, you start noticing it everywhere. The beach in Catching Fire, the hijacking in Mockingjay. Every time Peeta offers himself up, the power dynamics shift around him. So the question becomes, when he steps onto the Quarter-Quell platform, is he really just Katniss's fragile partner? Or is he already setting up his next sacrifice? Double suicide or double checkmate? The berries as narrative weapon. So when we get to the berries, you have to remember, this isn't coming out of nowhere. This is the moment all of Peeta's earlier moves cash in. We're not just watching two desperate teenagers threaten a double suicide. We're watching the endgame of a narrative he helped design. Reconstruct the standoff for a second. The rule change gets revoked. Suddenly, two tributes from the same district can win. disappears, and it's back to the original promise: one victor, one body walking out. Katniss spirals. She points an arrow at Peeta, begs him to run, then begs him to kill her. The games have trained her to think in terms of survival math. One of us has to die. That's the rule. But the rules aren't just about mutts and arenas. They're about story. And Peeta understands story. At face value, Katniss's solution, fine, then we both eat the Nightlock, looks impulsive, a last-second act of defiance from the girl who sang to Rue. But here's the real question. What does Peeta see in that split second that makes him go along without a fight? He knows the capital needs a victor. The entire structure of the games depends on a winner they can parade through every district. Proof that the system works. He knows the star-crossed lovers narrative is now too big to walk back. Sponsors bought into it. Caesar Flickerman sold it. The audience cried over it. And he knows that if they die together on live television, the capital doesn't just lose a victor. They create martyrs. Watch his response. He doesn't argue. He doesn't say, "No, you should kill me," even though that's been his stated preference all games long. He doesn't propose some tactical alternative, no last-second sprint, no fake-out. He leans into the escalation Katniss offers. That part matters because it's the first time we see him choose narrative leverage over personal sacrifice in the moment. This is where we talk about the berries as a weapon, not a prop. Peeta recognizes the trap instantly. Either the capital allows two victors, breaking the one-winner tradition on which their terror rests, or they let both tributes from the same poor district die for love, and that image spreads through Panem faster than any official broadcast. There is a lot to uncover here, but the basic equation is brutal. One decision, two ways for the capital to lose. And suddenly, the berries don't feel random, they feel inevitable. From the first interview, when Peeta drops the crush on Katniss revelation and forces the games to frame them as a package deal, he's been building toward a moment where separating them becomes politically impossible. The Nightlock is just the physical expression of that strategy. So when their hands close around the berries, you're not just seeing Katniss's rebellion, you're seeing the logical endpoint of the story Peeta launched on that stage, with the capital trapped in a relationship it can't control yet. And the capital never forgets that, which is why in the Quarterquell they change the rules again. After the arena, why Peeta doubles down on the love story. The capital changes the rules again, but the arena isn't the stage anymore. Now it's train cars, interview couches, and snow-covered streets in District 12. And suddenly the question isn't how do you survive the games, it's how do you survive winning them? Because once the Nightlock stunt turns Katniss into a symbol, Snow needs proof that the love story was real, or at least real enough to control. This is where we talk about that painfully awkward return home. On the train, in the book, Katniss tries to define the relationship, to separate what was performance from what was honest. And Peeta just shuts down. You feel that drop in your stomach when he realizes she didn't understand his promise in the arena the way he did. At face value, it looks simple. Girl faked it, boy's heartbroken. But here's the real question. If Peeta were only a wounded romantic, why doesn't he walk away from the act the second they hit District 12? Why doesn't he distance himself, stop holding her hand, let the capital see the truth? He's hurt, yes, but he's not stupid. He's the boy who read a crowd of bloodthirsty viewers and turned them into sponsors with a single confession. He knows exactly how dangerous it would be for Snow if the star-crossed lovers were exposed as a ploy. There is a lot to uncover here. Snow literally tells Katniss that the berries were an act of rebellion, that the districts saw hope in that choice. So what happens if the Capitol discovers the romance was just another strategy? The message to every district becomes, the games are rigged, the victors are lying, the narrative is fake. That part matters because Snow cannot afford that level of open cynicism. Someone has to keep the illusion alive. Peeta understands that before Katniss does. So when they step off the train, he doubles down. Publicly, he's perfect. Fingers intertwined with hers, soft smiles, practiced lines on camera, a proposal on live television during the victory tour. He turns their relationship into a shield, wrapping District 12 in a story the Capitol desperately wants to believe. If they're the tragic lovers who won the games through passion and fate, then punishing their district too harshly breaks the promise of hope Snow is selling. And the cost of that choice lands squarely on him. He has to keep performing affection for a girl who's admitted she doesn't love him the same way, while everyone assumes every flinch, every quiet moment is just heartbreak. Strategically, though, it's the only move that keeps her family, Haymitch, and their district breathing for now. So when you see Peeta let himself be misread, that's not passivity, that's long game. He'll take the hit, play the fool in love, if it keeps the Capitol's attention on a harmless romance and away from the much bigger rebellion starting to form around their victory. And the next time the cameras roll, that strategy gets even sharper. Victory tour, Peeta, turning Snow's propaganda into a weapon. Because the victory tour, that's not a celebration. That's a traveling threat. At face value, it's the Capitol's victory lap, a reminder to every district that the games are fair, that victors get a reward, that Snow is benevolent if you behave. But here's the real question. What happens when the good, grateful victor on that train quietly refuses the script without ever breaking it? This is where we talk about Peeta on the mic. Town square after town square, you're supposed to see two polished victors thanking the Capitol for its generosity. Instead, Peeta leans all the way into the romance narrative and then twists it. He doesn't brag about his kill count or the glory of the arena. He talks about shared suffering, about the cost of the games, about the humanity of the tributes who never came home. Watch the book version of those speeches. He names Rue. He talks about Thresh. He frames them not as fallen opponents, but as children whose deaths gave him and Katniss a future they now have to live up to. That part matters because it shifts the emotional center. The Capitol wants spectacle. Peeta keeps dragging the camera back to grief. You can feel the districts listening. You can feel the Capitol flinch. So why is this such a problem for Snow? Because every time Peeta emphasizes that their victory is built on other kids' bodies, he's reminding people in the crowd that their own dead tributes aren't just background characters in the Capitol's story. They're victims of a system. And he's doing it while looking completely compliant, completely in love, never once raising his voice. Then he escalates. No warning to Katniss, no private discussion. On live television, Peeta drops to one knee and proposes. On paper, that's the most harmless, Capitol-friendly move you could imagine. Romance, commitment, a perfect narrative arc. But there is a lot to uncover here. Because in that moment, he corners Snow. If Snow rejects the engagement, he risks exposing the whole star-crossed lovers story as a lie. If he accepts it, he's locking the capital into long-term investment in these two specific victors. Suddenly, Katniss and Peeta aren't just a tragic pair who beat the odds. They're potential future parents, a promise of little Games-era fairy tale children the capital can project onto. Why does that raise the stakes? Because once you let your audience start imagining babies, family, and next generation, any punishment you inflict becomes exponentially more volatile. Executing a troublesome victor is one thing. Executing a fiancé, a would-be father, the other half of your most successful propaganda relationship, that's how you get unrest. We're going to cover the quarter quell later, but the seed is planted here. Peeta is hijacking a capital platform in real time. He gives them the spectacle they asked for and quietly booby-traps it with hope, with long-term emotional leverage the districts can't unhear. So when Snow smiles through gritted teeth and plays along with the engagement, you have to ask, who actually won that round? And what happens when the capital finally tries to walk that promise back? The proposal trap, cornering Snow on live TV. So when Snow smiles through gritted teeth and plays along with the engagement, you have to ask, did Peeta just hand him a victory or spring a trap on live television? Because this is where we talk about the proposal as more than a sweet moment. It's a weaponized performance. At face value, it feels impulsive. Caesar Flickerman tosses Peeta a softball about the future. Katniss is bracing for more scripted trauma, and then he just drops it. They're engaged. No rehearsal. No warning. You can feel Katniss's brain short-circuit. That part matters because the capital audience is watching her in real time. And you can't fake that kind of confusion. Her shock sells the relationship harder than any rehearsed speech ever could. Here's the real question. Why spring it there with no chance for Katniss to prepare? Peeta knows she hates being used as a prop. He's already seen her fury after the first games, when the romance becomes a permanent assignment instead of a one-time strategy. If he were just trying to keep the peace with her, he'd talk first. But he's not just managing a relationship, he's managing an entire narrative ecosystem. Snow, sponsors, districts, the game's legacy itself. On that couch, Peeta is doing game board math. Snow has already threatened Katniss's district. The victory tour has barely contained the unrest, so Peeta escalates. He doesn't just say, "We're in love," he upgrades it to a promise the capital adores, a wedding, a future, a symbol of hope that they can package and replay. He hands Snow a shiny storyline and, in the same move, makes it incredibly messy to punish District 12 without looking like the villain of his own broadcast. And it's dangerous, because what happens if Snow refuses the wedding? The capital audience sees the crack. What happens if he allows it and then announces a quarter quell that sends this newly engaged couple back into the arena? Suddenly, the games aren't just reaping victors, they're potentially killing a fiancé on live TV. That's not just tragic, it's narratively inconvenient. You can't sell wholesome love story and necessary punishment in the same breath without people asking why. Pattern interrupt for a second. Imagine the quarter quell announcement without the proposal. Just names on a card. Cold. Procedural. The districts would still be horrified, but the capital could spin it as tradition. With the engagement in place, though, the twist feels personal, targeted. It exposes the capital's cruelty instead of hiding it behind ceremony. Katniss's anger actually amplifies that. Her stiff body language, her clipped answers, the way she keeps getting blindsided by Peeta's moves, those are tells. To a capital viewer, that's not rebellion, that's a girl in over her head. To a district viewer, it's something else. Proof she never signed up to be their symbol, which makes her suffering feel even more authentic. So when Snow later tries to walk the promise back with the Quarter Quell, Peeta has already booby-trapped the narrative. The capital can still hurt them, but it can't do it cleanly. Every act of cruelty now contradicts the romance they've been selling. We're going to cover how Peeta keeps pushing that tension in the arena itself, turning every self-sacrifice into another public indictment of the game's logic. Quarter Quell Peeta, from lover to moral center of Panem. So when we hit the Quarter Quell, Peeta doesn't just keep that tension going, he escalates it. At face value, catching fire is where Katniss becomes the symbol and Peeta becomes the fiancé accessory. He's the one holding her hand, finishing the script, playing the dutiful victor. But here's the real question. If he's just a prop, why does he keep ending up as the only person on stage talking about justice, grief, and the value of a single human life in a system built on disposable children? This is where we talk about the Victory Tour. You remember that stop in District 11? The script says, smile, thank the capital, reassure everyone the games are fair. Instead, Peeta goes completely off book. He promises Rue and Thresh's families a share of his and Katniss's winnings. Forever. No approval, no legal framework, just a public, irrevocable promise broadcast to every district. There is a lot to uncover here. On the surface, it's generosity. Underneath, he's redefining what a victor owes. In a world where the games say, you live because they died, Peeta says, I live so I pay a debt. That part matters because it turns personal guilt into public obligation. He's quietly arguing that every life taken by the arena has a cost the victors, and by extension the capital, are responsible for. And he doesn't stop with one emotional speech. Watch how he moves through the tour. He sees the other victors not as rivals in some glamorous alumni club, but as traumatized hostages. He's the one who keeps clocking their pain, adjusting his tone, trying to ease the pressure in every room. When Katniss is scanning for exits, Peeta is scanning for dignity. Who can he acknowledge? Whose suffering can he name without getting them killed? So why does that shift matter? Because it builds a persona the capital can't easily weaponize. A bloodthirsty victor is simple to frame. A sullen, broken one is easy to ignore. But a calm, articulate moral center who keeps talking about fairness and shared responsibility, that's harder to demonize without looking monstrous in comparison. Peeta becomes the conscience of the games, not just another piece on the board. And the capital accidentally helps him. Every time Caesar Flickerman tees him up for romance, Peeta slips in something heavier. A memory of a tribute. A reminder that the arena is not a love story backdrop, but a graveyard. We're going to cover how those small moments accumulate, but the pattern is clear. He knows his words echo. That's why the hijacking hits so hard later. The Peeta who wanted to support Rue's family is suddenly on screen calling for Katniss's death. The contrast between the boy who humanized every victim and the weapon screaming for blood shocks the districts awake. It proves the capital will literally rewrite a person's soul to keep the games going. And Peter seems to understand that long before the needles. Even when he's just playing the fiancé, you can feel him choosing every line as if it might be replayed in a different future. One where the truth finally matters more than the script. The baby bomb, one sentence that sets Panem on fire, and then we get to the moment where one sentence does what an entire rebel army hasn't managed yet. The Quarter Quell interviews are supposed to be the capital's victory lap. You remember the setup, all the surviving victors paraded in front of Caesar Flickerman, sequins and smoke machines everywhere, the promise that this is entertainment, not an execution. At face value, you're just watching a fashion show with a higher body count. The capital expects glamour, not grief. Definitely not rebellion. But here's the real question. Why bring back all these victors, dress them up, and hand them microphones when you fully intend to kill them on live television? That part matters because it shows how arrogant the games really are as a system. Snow thinks the script is so locked in that even desperate, doomed people will still play their assigned roles. The flirt, the drunk, the psycho, the tragic hero. This is where we talk about Peter walking on stage already knowing the script and then setting it on fire. We've already seen him weaponize an interview once with the crush on Katniss reveal. Now the stakes are higher. The relationship isn't just a cute narrative. It's the only thin shield Katniss has. So when he drops the baby bomb, Katniss is pregnant, he doesn't just surprise Caesar, he reframes the entire Quarter Quell in a single breath. In that instant, the games stop being about all-star victors battling it out. They become the capital murdering a pregnant woman for sport. The optics are brutal. You can hear it in the crowd. Gasps, people shouting, someone crying out no. The camera swings to faces that were supposed to be passive spectators. And suddenly, they're witnesses to an obvious injustice. You're watching the exact moment hope mutates into outrage. There is a lot to uncover here. Peter knows this crowd. He's read them before. He understands that the districts might tolerate their children dying every year under the promise of order and survival, but a pregnant victor, that crosses a line even the capital's glitter can't hide. And he times it so Katniss can't walk it back without looking coerced. The story is out. The games can't unhear it. Strategically, it's a trap. If the capital denies the pregnancy, they admit they've been lying to their own audience for ratings. If they accept it, they admit they're the kind of regime that sends an unborn child's mother into an arena. Either way, the narrative control they've guarded for 75 years starts to crack. Sponsors, districts, even some capital citizens are forced to ask a dangerous question. What exactly are we cheering for? And notice the pattern. Once again, Peter isn't just trying to save Katniss in the arena, he's trying to delegitimize the games themselves in the public eye. He turns his own supposed future child into a shield for every district watching. It's self-sacrifice as propaganda warfare. So if this is what he can do with one sentence, what happens when the capital finally takes his voice away? Arena 2.0, why Peter keeps making himself the weakest link. When the capital finally takes his voice away, something strange happens first. They spend an entire games making sure you underestimate him. In Catching Fire's arena, Peeta is, on paper, a liability. He's not a career. He doesn't have Finnick's trident skills, Johanna's axe, or Beatty's genius. He has a prosthetic leg, no natural wilderness training, and he almost dies in the bloodbath if Finnick doesn't physically drag him out. At face value, he's the obvious weakest link in a quarter quell full of killers. But here's the real question. Why does the narrative keep circling back to him anyway? Because by this point, Peeta isn't just a body in the arena. He's half of the Mockingjay relationship package the Capitol accidentally created. Every district has seen the cave scenes, the berries, the wedding dress that burns into a Mockingjay. Snow can't just erase Peeta without also damaging the love story that's supposed to keep the games palatable. That part matters because it means Peeta's physical weakness is constantly fighting with his symbolic importance. And Peeta knows it. This is where we talk about his Katniss lives, I die routine. In the arena, he keeps insisting that her survival is the priority. He begs Haymitch to keep her alive. He tries to get Finnick and the others to promise they'll save her, not him. On the surface, it's self-effacing, almost passive. But what is he really doing there? He's locking everyone into her protection with their own words. A promise in the games is social currency. If Finnick agrees Katniss has to live, he's now morally and politically tied to that choice. Peeta turns his supposed expendability into leverage, forcing the Alliance to orbit Katniss, and by extension, orbit him, because he's the one constantly offering himself up. And notice the pressure that puts on Katniss. If he's always the one willing to die, how do you justify letting him? She owes him from the bread, from the cave, from the victory tour proposal. The rebels owe him because their whole media strategy rests on this tragic devoted victor from District 12. By framing himself as the expendable one, Peeta quietly makes it politically, emotionally, and narratively necessary to keep him breathing. Here's the twist. The more he leans into self-sacrifice, the harder it is for anyone to write him off as a threat. Who suspects the boy who keeps trying to hand his life away? He becomes morally untouchable, even as he's nudging alliances, sponsor attention, and public sympathy into place. There is a lot to uncover here, but the long game investment is brutal. The more the world believes Peeta is good and harmless, the more devastating his hijacked state becomes, not just for Katniss, but for the rebellion's entire story. So when the Capitol finally turns him into a weapon, whose groundwork are they actually standing on? Captured Peeta, hostage, traitor, or reluctant double agent. So when the Capitol finally turns him into a weapon, whose groundwork are they actually standing on? To answer that, we have to drop into the moment everything literally blows apart. The end of the quarter quell is chaos in slow motion. The force field shatters, the sky goes white, and suddenly the arena, the safest controlled space the Capitol has, is collapsing under its own rigged design. You've got the hovercraft roaring in, bodies disappearing into the air, and Katniss waking up to the terrifying realization that she's been pulled out. Saved, but not with the person she promised never to leave. At face value, Peeta being scooped up by a Capitol hovercraft looks simple. Wrong place, wrong time. Unlucky victor. But here's the real question. Why does Snow's regime grab him and not Katniss, the literal Mockingjay target they've been obsessing over? That part matters because from the Capitol's perspective, Peeta is actually the cleaner asset. Think about the optics. Katniss is already volatile on camera, buries arrows at game makers, open defiance. She's the symbol you execute or eradicate, not the one you rehabilitate. Peeta, though, he's the boy with the bread, the soft-spoken artist, the romantic who told the world he'd had a crush on her since he was 5. If you're the Capitol, that's a hostage you can work with. You can put him in a suit, sit him under studio lights, and sell a story. So, were they just lucky to get him? Or did Peeta on some level know this was a live possibility? We're going to cover more of his game board awareness later, but remember who he is going into that quell. He's the one who understands crowds, who weaponizes interviews, who volunteers in Haymitch's place because he knows Snow will use their relationship. When the arena falls and he's the one left behind while the Mockingjay escapes, it's not just tragedy, it's a strategic pivot point. There is a lot to uncover here. Even chained to a hospital bed, Peeta's long game doesn't fully stop. His choices under torture, what he resists, what he gives into when he breaks on camera, will decide how every district reads the Katniss Peeta story. Does he condemn her and confirm the Capitol's narrative? Does he hesitate just enough to plant doubt in a world where every broadcast is another round of the games? His performance is still a move. This is where we talk about power under absolute control. The hijacking strips his memories and floods him with terror, but it doesn't erase the fact that he has always understood one thing better than almost anyone: the relationship between image and survival. So when you watch hijacked Peeta shaking on Capitol TV, here's the real question. Are we seeing a completely broken pawn, or are there still strategic flashes of the boy from the bakery trying in any way he can to rig the narrative one more time? Hijacking 101. How the Capitol tries to rewrite Peeta's long game. So if Peeta's greatest weapon has always been his grip on the story, what do you attack when you want to turn that weapon against him? You go after the story itself. This is where we talk about hijacking. At face value, the Capitol dresses it up as medical treatment, as if they've graciously rescued a damaged victor from the chaos of war. But here's the real question. What are they actually doing to him? In Mockingjay, we learn it's a 3-part process: tracker-jacker venom, torture, and deliberate memory manipulation, engineered to turn love into fear and loyalty into hatred. It's not random madness, it's targeted editing. Tracker-jacker venom already distorts perception in the arena, sending tributes into hallucinations where they can't trust what they see, remember, or feel. The Capitol takes that same chemistry and industrializes it. They bombard Peeta with images of Katniss, of the games of fire and explosions, then pair those images with pain and terror until his brain rewrites the associations. Katniss saving his life at the careers camp, now it plays as an attack. The cave, the kisses, the promise of hope for their district, recut as manipulation and threat. And that part matters because Peeta's power has never been physical dominance. It's been interpretation. From the crush on Katniss revealed to his rooftop speech about dying as himself, he's always controlled the emotional frame around the games. He reads crowds, sponsors, even Snow, and then decides what version of events goes public. So the cruel irony is brutal. The Capitol doesn't just torture his body, they go straight for the narrative center in his head. Why does that scare them so much? Because Peeta has been the moral lens of the trilogy. He's the one who insists on seeing people as human, who refuses to let the arena define what a person is worth. Hijacking is an attempt to erase that long game. If Katniss is the symbol, Peeta is the commentary track explaining what the symbol means. The Capitol's plan is to overwrite the commentary and then hit play. We're going to cover how effective that is, but first, look at the strategy. They don't just want to break Peeta and toss him aside. They want to weaponize him. They put his familiar face on Capitol broadcasts, his trusted voice accusing Katniss of being a mutt, a danger, a liar. Why? Because they know the districts believe him. They watched him hold her hand on Caesar's couch, beg for her life in 2 different games, and sell the star-crossed lovers story so hard that even Snow had to play along. So when that same boy from the bakery suddenly calls the Mockingjay a threat, the Capitol is betting the audience will flinch. If Peeta Mellark says the rebellion is wrong, doesn't that make you hesitate? That's the plan. Turn the rebellion's moral center into a living, breathing counter-argument. But there is a lot to uncover here, because even through the venom and the terror, we start to see something strange. Flashes where the strategic mind we met on the train to the Capitol seems to push through the fog. The question is, are those accidents, or is Peeta even hijacked, still trying to play the long game from inside his own broken memories? Signals through the static, strategic flashes in hijacked Peeta. So let's zoom in on those accidents, because once you start replaying Peeta's hijacked moments, something unnerving happens. The strategic pattern you thought was gone keeps resurfacing. We start with the Capitol broadcasts. On paper, those interviews are pure weaponized trauma. Tortured Victor, hijacked memories, Snow's favorite new toy. At face value, Peeta is just parroting the party line. Katniss is dangerous. The rebels are lying. Call off the war. But here's the real question. Why do his warnings sound less like random fear-mongering and more like a very specific tactical brief? Look at what he actually says. He doesn't just scream Katniss is a monster. He tells her to stop being the Mockingjay, to demand a ceasefire, to think about the districts getting bombed in retaliation. That part matters because it works on 2 audiences at once. For the Capitol, it reads as perfect propaganda. For Katniss, it's the exact kind of concrete, casualty-focused argument the real Peeta has always used to pull her back from reckless moves. Is that purely programming? Or a hijacked mind still trying to save as many lives as possible with the only microphone he has? Then we get the pattern interrupt. He starts deteriorating on air. He's thinner, more frantic, bleeding through the makeup. And instead of collapsing into nonsense, he gets more precise. They're going to kill you, Katniss. You need to get out. That's not a broad political slogan. That's actionable intel handed to the rebellion in real time. Snow thinks he's dangling a broken Victor for spectacle. Peeta, even poisoned, is still doing what he did in every games, reading the board and shouting coordinates. Once he's in District 13, the venom doesn't magically turn off. But this is where we talk about those interrogation scenes. In between the flashbacks and the strangling attempts, he keeps circling the same questions. What does Coin really want? What happens after Snow? Are we just trading one capital for another? Why is no one talking about the body count we're racking up in the name of hope? Notice the focus. Even when he can't trust his own memories, He keeps reaching for reality checks. Real or not real isn't just a coping mechanism for romance. It's a political test. What's true? Who benefits from this version of the story? What are they doing to me, to Katniss, to every district child being turned into a symbol or a weapon? There is a lot to uncover here, because that instinct to interrogate the narrative instead of surrendering to it is exactly who Peeta was on the rooftop before any arena. The hijacking scrambles his relationship with Katniss, but it doesn't erase his core refusal to be owned by the games, by Snow, or by Coin's carefully managed rebellion. So when he challenges Coin in the War Council, when he questions the necessary attacks, he's not glitching. He's staying on mission. We're going to cover how that mission plays out in the endgame, but the seeds are here. Peeta Mellark's long game was never just about saving one girl. It was about resisting any system that tries to write his story for him and pulling the rest of Panem out of the script too. Real or not real, rebuilding a mind like rewriting a story. So when we finally get to real or not real, it sounds simple. A yes or no game. A damaged victor asking his former ally to fact-check his brain. But here's the real question. Is this Peeta breaking down, or Peeta quietly rebuilding the one weapon the Capitol could never fully control? His narrative? At face value, the hijacking works. The Capitol scrambles his memories, wires Katniss to terror, and turns his love story into a kill switch. That's efficient, in a horrifying, Snow-approved way. But there is a lot to uncover here, because the recovery process doesn't just heal him, it restores his old strategy in a new form. Every time he turns to Katniss and asks, real or not real, he's doing what he's always done in the games, on trains, in interviews, testing a story against reality before he decides how to live inside it. Think back to his first interview with Caesar. He throws out the "I've had a crush on her" confession and watches the crowd, the cameras, the game makers. Is the reaction useful? Can he turn it into protection for both of them? That's the same instinct at work when he asks, "You and I? We were teammates? Real or not real?" He's reading her tone, her hesitation, the way the room shifts. The question isn't just about memory, it's about which version of events will give them the best chance to move forward. This is where we talk about power. On paper, Katniss is the caretaker here, the one with the intact memories, the one answering. But that part matters, because Peeta is the one choosing the questions. He decides which scenes to pull up, which emotions to test. He is not passively downloading a Capitol-approved patch. He's interrogating each memory one by one until it passes both logical and emotional inspection. And notice how the ritual becomes their new relationship language. In the arena, his long game was huge and public alliances, sponsor optics, the star-crossed lovers performance that shielded District 12. Now the board is smaller, a kitchen table, a shared bed after nightmares. But the method is the same. We're going to cover how this scales back up in the epilogue, but even here, you can see him rebuilding the capacity to plan. If this memory is real, what promise did I make? If it's not, what do I need to replace it with? Real or not real is the ultimate anti-Capitol move, because it refuses their final edit. The war is technically over. The bombs have fallen. The districts have voted. The Capitol's last weapon is the idea that they still get to define who Peeta was. Weapon, victim, liability. Instead, he and Katniss sit there and rewrite, line by line, scene by scene. The games tried to turn him into a script. The hijacking tried to overwrite that script. But every question he asks is a tiny act of authorship, a way of saying, I will decide which memories I keep and which story I'm living in now. And once he can do that again on the scale of his own mind, he's ready to aim that long game at the future of Panem itself. Book Peeta versus Movie Peeta. How adaptation hides and reveals the long game. So once you start seeing Peeta as a narrative engineer inside his own hijacked brain, you hit the next problem. The movies don't always help you see him that way. This is where we talk about adaptation. Because on the page, you're trapped in Katniss's head. Every time Peeta speaks, you also get her running commentary on his timing, his tone, the way he's clearly playing to the crowd. At face value, the films keep most of the big Peeta beats. But here's the real question. Which parts of his long game get sharpened and which parts get sanded down until he just looks soft? Think about Book Peeta in the first games. You get his rooftop speech about wanting to die as himself, his quiet analysis of how the Capitol uses the games to erase identity, his pointed questions about what winning even means. Katniss notices that he's reading the room during training, calibrating his persona, deciding when to play weak and when to show strength. A lot of that survives only as subtext in the films because you lose her narration spelling out his internal logic. On screen, what do you see instead? A boy who gets injured, a boy who gets carried. The camera lingers on his limp, on the camouflage on Katniss dragging him through the mud. There is a lot to uncover here, because visually the story leans hard into his physical vulnerability and sweetness. That part matters because it quietly dials down his political edge. You feel for him as a victim of the games, but you don't always clock him as someone dissecting the system in real time. But the strategy is still there, if you're watching for it. The first interview? That crush on Katniss reveal plays almost purely romantic in the movie, yet Josh Hutcherson's performance has this tiny hesitation before he says it, a breath where you can see him choosing a weapon. We're going to cover that moment more later, but notice how he glances at Caesar, not Katniss. He's checking the crowd. He's measuring impact, not confessing a secret. In the book, Katniss tells you outright that Peeta is steering the narrative, using romance as a shield for their district. In the film, you mostly get the spectacle, but watch his eyes during the interview. He's not just mooning over her, he's tracking Snow, the audience, the cameras. You can feel the calculation under the charm. If you remember, this is a victor who knows exactly how the Capitol edits footage. So why does so much of the fandom still tag him as just the love interest? Because when you strip out Katniss's internal explanations, the default reading of a kind, non-violent boy in a war story is soft. The adaptation leans into that contrast for emotional impact, and in doing so, it accidentally masks the reason he's so dangerous to the Capitol. He keeps rewriting their script. Rewatch the films with that in mind, and suddenly every apology, every self-sacrificing offer, every shaky smile looks different. You start asking, is this Peeta giving up, or Peeta moving a piece on the board? And that question becomes a lot more urgent when you get to the moment he joins the careers. Because on screen, that twist plays fast, almost too fast. Peeta versus Katniss. Two different games, same war, So when Peeta joins the careers and Katniss bolts up that tree, you're watching two completely different games unfold on the same arena floor. Katniss is playing the version we all instinctively understand. How do we not die today? Her strengths are built for that. She's a hunter from a poor district. She reads a forest in a heartbeat. She can tell edible from poisonous without a handbook. She's fast, stubborn, and when the fireballs hit or the mutts are released, she doesn't freeze. She moves. But her real weapon is weirder. It's that raw authenticity she can't fully control. Think about her volunteering for Prim, the salute to Rue, the berries. None of that is rehearsed. She's not workshopping lines in a mirror. She reacts, honestly, and the districts feel that honesty in their bones. At face value, it looks chaotic, emotionally driven, dangerous. That part matters because the capital can't predict it. Peeta, though, he's not built for the tree. He's built for the camera. His strengths are verbal agility, emotional intelligence, and this unnerving ability to shape how other people interpret what they're already seeing. We're going to cover the Crush Confession more later, but notice what it proves. Before the games even start, he reframes Katniss from girl on fire from the seam to my doomed first love. Same girl, new story. Here's the real question. If Katniss is the spark, what keeps that spark from just burning out in one spectacular, forgettable blaze? The answer is Peeta's long game. Bow, arrow, tree, water, today. On the rooftop, she's asking if there's any way to win without becoming a piece in their games. In the arena, that translates to who is trying to kill me in the next 5 minutes. Meanwhile, Peeta is already thinking, if we survive, what narrative will the capital sell tomorrow, next week, across every district screen? That's why he goes with the careers. On the ground, it's a terrible survival alliance. Long term, it lets him redirect their hunt, obscure Katniss's trail, and position himself as the tragic boy torn between them and her. He's making sure that when the audience looks back, there's a through line they can follow. This is where we talk about the rebellion's actual needs. You don't win only with arrows and explosions. You win with a story people can repeat in the dark. Katniss is the unpredictable spark. She creates the moments that break through the capital fog. Peeta is the steady narrative that stitches those moments into a pattern. Star-crossed lovers, unjust rules, rigged system. He turns incidents into evidence. Ignore him and you miss half the war. Underestimating Peeta's role is watching the arena's fireballs and ignoring the quiet propaganda war threaded through every interview, every apology, every "I'd rather die than lose her." And the capital understands that danger a little too well, which is why their next move isn't to kill Peeta's body, it's to rewrite his mind. Self-sacrifice as leverage. How Peeta quietly controls the board. So if the capital's answer is to rewrite his mind, you have to ask, what was so dangerous about the way Peeta was already playing the board? This is where we talk about self-sacrifice, because Peeta doesn't just risk himself once in a dramatic gesture. He builds an entire strategy out of being the person who will burn first, so everyone else has to move around the fire. Start at the bread. At face value, it's a starving boy in the rain and a kind baker's son tossing out burned loaves. But that part matters because it forges a permanent, asymmetrical relationship. Katniss owes him her family's survival. She spends years replaying that moment, wondering why he did it, feeling that debt in every interaction. One act, and he's already living rent-free in the future Mockingjay's head. Then the riverbank in the first games. Peeta, bleeding out, literally camouflages himself into the mud so Katniss can survive longer. On paper, it's irrational. Why give up your best chance of escape? But again, he positions himself as the one who can be lost. She now has to decide, does she leave him, or does she become the kind of person who walks away from the boy who once threw her bread? The cave just escalates it. He's dying of blood poisoning, telling her to win, telling her to forget him. You read it as romance, sure, but here's the real question. What does that do to the narrative? It forces Haymitch, sponsors, and the audience to respond. They can't just watch a girl abandon the boy who keeps offering himself up. His sacrifice manufactures sponsor guilt, audience sympathy, and a steady stream of medicine and food. That's soft power. By the quarter quell, he's turned it into a system. He promises to keep Katniss alive, to die in her place, to protect her unborn child on national television. Every promise corners someone. Katniss has to keep him alive to protect her family. Haymitch has to prioritize him because the pregnant wife story has the districts in tears. Even the other victors feel morally bound to shield him. Killing Peeta now means betraying not just a person, but a symbol of hope they've all sold to their own districts. And in Mockingjay, he's still doing it, telling the rescue team to leave him in the capital, volunteering his life again so the others can get out. Why does that scare Snow more than Katniss shooting down a hovercraft? Because a person whose pain the whole country cares about is a walking referendum on capital cruelty. Every time he suffers, the question isn't just, will he live? It's what kind of system keeps doing this to him. By making himself expendable, Peeta becomes indispensable. Katniss's arc, Snow's strategy, Coin's propaganda, the district's hope, none of those stories function the same way without the boy who keeps stepping onto the altar. And the Capitol's next move proves they understand that. If you can't stop someone from weaponizing their own self-sacrifice, you don't kill them. You try to turn that weapon inward. We're going to cover how well that actually works in the next section. What if Peeta wasn't playing the long game? The rebellion without him. So let's pull the plug on Peeta for a second. Not kill him, just remove the long game. Imagine he never drops the crush confession in that first interview. At face value, nothing changes. 2 tributes go into the arena. May the odds be ever in your favor. Roll credits. But here's the real question. What happens when Katniss walks in as just another tribute from a starving district, with no packaged romance, no star-crossed lover's promise for the audience to latch onto? You lose sponsors immediately. No lovers from District 12 angle, no reason for the Capitol to pour medicine and bread onto the arena floor to keep their favorite drama alive. Cinna's styling still turns heads, sure, but without Peeta's narrative, Katniss is an impressive archer, not a phenomenon. Rue dies, the berries stunt might still happen, but the emotional relationship the Capitol has with them is weaker. It's 2 clever tributes cheating the games, not a tragic love story defying the system. Now strip out the baby bomb and the proposal from the quarter quell. No shaky Peeta, tell me about the baby moment. No kneeling in the snow on Caesar's stage. The 3rd quarter quell is still horrific, but that part matters because it's not personalized horror anymore. It's abstract, cruel, yes, But the district's and capital citizens aren't watching a pregnant girl and her devoted fiancé march to slaughter. They're watching returning victors, and the moral outrage dials down from a scream to a steady, miserable hum. So why does that matter for the rebellion? Because outrage is fuel. Without Peeta weaponizing romance, the games stay a distant atrocity instead of a family drama everyone in Panem feels entitled to judge. There is a lot to uncover here. Coin can still raise Katniss up as the Mockingjay, but this is where we talk about narrative control, with no soft-spoken baker boy on the broadcasts insisting on mercy, warning about cycles of violence. Coin has more space to define what justice looks like, and it probably tracks a lot closer to her bombing strategy in the Nut than to Peeta's remember who the real enemy is. No crush confession, no speeches, no hijacked Peeta raging on Capitol TV, turning his own suffering into a mirror for Snow's cruelty. What does Panem remember? The games become easier to sanitize. The Capitol can say, "It was terrible, but it was necessary," without the image of a boy who kept refusing to play their role burned into everyone's memory. That's the reason this thought experiment matters. Peeta's long game isn't a cute headcanon, it's structural. Remove his strategic choices, and you don't just get a sadder Katniss, you get a harsher rebellion, a cleaner Capitol conscience, and a history that's a lot easier to rewrite. So if the Capitol tries to turn that weapon inward, hijacking him, rewriting him, does that finally break the game? Or does it prove how deep his strategy actually goes? Hope, fear, and the soft weapon. Peeta in Snow's political theory. If Snow is right about anything, it's this. You don't topple a regime with explosions. You do it with the wrong kind of hope. So this is where we talk about that fireside lesson he gives Seneca Crane. Snow lays it out like a math problem. Fear keeps the districts in line, but you can't run on pure terror forever. People burn out. They stop playing the games. So you add hope, the only thing stronger than fear, but you keep it on a leash. Victor's village, the bread, the celebrations. A little promise that maybe your child survives if they're special enough. At face value, Peeta is the safest version of that hope. He's soft-spoken, he bakes, he compliments Caesar's tie. This is not a revolutionary aesthetic, but here's the real question. Why does Snow keep circling back to him over and over instead of just erasing him? If Peeta were only harmless, he'd be disposable. Peeta is dangerous precisely because he embodies a form of hope the Capitol can't fully script. He's kind without being obedient. He's gentle, but he keeps doing things that technically break the rules. Telling the world he loves Katniss on live television, throwing away his own chance at solo survival with the berries stunt. Proposing publicly on the victory tour so Snow has to either bless the relationship or admit the romance was a lie. Every time, he defies them in ways that make the audience swoon, not riot. That part matters because Snow's whole theory hinges on controlling the relationship between fear and hope. Peeta keeps slipping out of that equation. So why not just kill him after the first games? The reason is political optics. Snow wants to weaponize Peeta's image, not waste it. In Catching Fire, he leans on Peeta to sell the happy victor narrative, to calm the districts, to keep Katniss emotionally off balance. Later, in Mockingjay, hijacked Peeta is literally Snow's attempt to twist that same hopeful symbol into a knife aimed at the rebellion's heart. Take the boy who promised protection and turn him into the one person Katniss can't trust. But here's the twist the Capitol doesn't calculate. The more they hurt Peeta, the more they expose themselves. You watch those broadcasts of him deteriorating in the Capitol, and the fear message is there. We can reach anyone. But the cruelty leaks through. Why torture the baker's son this much if your system is stable? There is a lot to uncover here, because even broken, Peeta keeps making choices that reassert his original strategy. He begs them to stop the war on air. He tries to warn Katniss in the interview. After the hijacking, every moment of recovery, every time he fights through the false memories and chooses not to kill her, becomes a counter-narrative to Snow's fear. Hope isn't just surviving, it's forgiving in a world built on punishment. Peeta ends up as Snow's worst-case scenario, hope carefully controlled, that escapes containment, walks back into the districts, and says, essentially, I know exactly what they did to me, and I still won't play their game. So if Snow's math is breaking, what replaces it on the board? Peeta and coin, calling out the new capital before it exists. So if Snow's math is breaking, what replaces it on the board? Peeta's answer is brutal in its simplicity. If you don't change the rules of the game, you just swap out the dealer. Different roses, same poison. This is where we talk about Peeta and coin. In Mockingjay, when everyone else is still high on the adrenaline of rescue, Peeta is the one on camera asking the question no one in District 13 wants to hear. Will killing Snow actually fix anything? Or are we just installing a new capital with better branding and greyer uniforms? At face value, his warning broadcasts as hijacked paranoia. But step back for a second. Why is the supposedly broken tribute the only one saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't bomb the entire capital full of children? There is a lot to uncover here, because even through the fog of torture and conditioning, Peeta keeps circling the same core principle he had on the rooftop in the first book. He doesn't want to be a piece in their games. The pronoun just quietly shifts. It's not there, as in Snow anymore. It's there, as in anyone who treats human lives as currency for a narrative, whether they're wearing white roses or a Mockingjay pin. Watch how he talks in the propos. He challenges Coin's strategy on air, asking why the rebels are targeting infrastructure that civilians rely on. He questions whether executing Snow publicly will actually heal the districts or just feed the same spectacle cycle. Who else in that bunker is thinking past the next airstrike? Who else is worrying about what story the new Panem is going to tell about itself when the smoke clears? But here's the real question. Why does Peeta, of all people, still care about that? After everything, why isn't he just out for revenge? The reason goes back to his long game. Surviving the war was never the end point for him. From the moment he weaponized the star-crossed lovers angle, his strategy has been about altering the narrative architecture around the games, making it harder for any capital, old or new, to plug people into the same script. That part matters because Coin is obsessed with scripts. She tries to own Katniss's image the way Snow did, just with a different color palette. She wants a clean revenge arc, a simple villain, a tidy execution. Peeta keeps refusing to cooperate with that, even when he's dangerous. Even when he's wrong about Katniss, he's still right about the system. If you build your victory on televised death, you're just running season 2 of the Hunger Games. So when he pushes Katniss to think about what happens after, He's not undermining the rebellion, he's future-proofing it. He's one of the few characters consistently thinking past the immediate battle to the story the new Panem will tell its children. Is this a world where power owns your narrative again, or one where victors finally get to be more than pieces? And once you see Peeta doing that with coin, you have to ask, how many of his earlier soft choices were actually hard counters against any regime that tried to script him? The meadow, the children, the epilogue, long game completed. So when we finally cut to that meadow, years later, it almost feels wrong, right? After arenas, bombed districts, hijacking and executions, we end on wildflowers, a baby on Katniss's chest, and Peeta playing with their son in the grass. At face value, it reads soft, domestic, the anti-games. But here's the real question. Is this an escape from the story Peeta's been building, or the moment his long game actually lands? Remember that rooftop in Book 1? Peeta staring at the sky, saying he doesn't want the games to change him, that he wants to show the capital they don't own him. Back then, that sounds almost naive in a world where your district can be starved on a whim. Now zoom out to the epilogue, the capital that tried to weaponize his body, his mind, his relationship, ends up with this. A man who married the girl they turned into a symbol, in the ruins of the district they burned, raising children they will never reap. That part matters because Snow's entire system runs on inherited terror. Every child is a potential tribute. Every parent lives with that countdown clock. So why is choosing to have kids here such a big deal? Because for Katniss, that rooftop promise was impossible for years. She tells us she never wanted children under the games. The trauma wasn't abstract. It was math. 2 kids, 2 extra names in the glass bowl. Peeta is the one who keeps wanting a future anyway. And when they finally agree, it's not some cheesy epilogue reward. It's a political act, a decision that says, we believe, with evidence, that the games are gone for good, that the new Panem, flawed as it is, cannot legally or culturally drag our children into an arena for ratings. This is where we talk about narrative repair. Peeta's been doing it since that first interview, when he dropped the crush on Katniss bomb to seize control of the story. In the epilogue, he's still doing it, just on a quieter stage. He and Katniss play that game with their children, real or not real. But notice who's steering those conversations. Peeta answers, contextualizes, softens without lying. He's teaching the next generation the truth about the war and the games, but on their terms, not the capitals, not coins, not some new propaganda reel. We're going to cover how this isn't a retreat from politics, it's a redefinition of the battlefield. The spectacle is gone. The fear is private now. So why end here? Because Peeta's decades-long strategy was never just to survive a specific arena. It was to reclaim authorship over his life, his district, his family. And if the meadow is his checkmate, what does that say about every soft move he made on the way there? Peeta as archetype, the strategist of soft power in dystopia. So when you zoom out from that quiet meadow, you realize something unnerving. Peeta Mellark isn't just winning his own freedom, he's rewriting what a victor can be in a dystopia that worships violence. Think about the usual dystopian hero you're handed. Katniss, obviously, but also Triss in Divergent, Thomas in The Maze Runner, even classic rebels who pick up weapons, lead raids, blow up trains. Their resistance is visible, kinetic, pointed straight at the system's body. Peeta? He points at its story. At face value, he's the soft one, the baker, the boy who paints and decorates cakes. But here's the real question. Why does someone that gentle end up doing more damage to the capital's narrative than half the armed rebels put together? This is where we talk about soft power in a hard world. In Panem, kindness is framed as weakness, on purpose. The games train you to believe that mercy gets you killed, that empathy is a liability your district can't afford. Peeta flips that script. He uses kindness the way other tributes use weapons, the bread to Katniss when they're children, the crush confession in the interview, the way he comforts dying tributes on camera. Each move creates a relationship between audience and victim that the Capitol cannot fully control. That part matters because Snow's entire promise is that the games are entertainment, not a moral crisis. Peeta keeps turning them back into a moral crisis. So why do so many readers still misread him as passive? One reason is point of view. We live inside Katniss's head, and her metric for strength is shaped by starvation, hunting, and the daily question of, who do I shoot? When Peeta volunteers for the interviews, or chooses words over weapons, Katniss often sees it as naive or even dangerous. We're trained to agree with her. We feel her urgency, not his strategy. There is a lot to uncover here, because every time Katniss dismisses Peeta's softness, the narrative is quietly asking you whether you're also dismissing an entire form of resistance in your own world. Pattern interrupt. What if Peeta isn't the exception, but the prototype? Suddenly you start noticing all the people who get written off as too sensitive, too diplomatic, too emotional in systems that profit from aggression. Teachers who shield students by gaming test rules, nurses who bend hospital policy to keep patients safe, activists who tell better stories instead of throwing the first punch. Peeta stands in for all of them. His long game asks, who are we underestimating because they don't look dangerous on a battlefield? And that's the final shift. Peeta isn't just Katniss's love interest, he's a blueprint for a different revolutionary hero, one who understands that in a spectacle-driven dictatorship, controlling the narrative is as critical as controlling the weapons. We're going to cover how that blueprint plays out in specific scenes next, but keep this in mind. Every soft choice you've seen from him might actually be the sharpest move on the board. Rewatch challenge: how to spot long game Peeta in every scene. So here's your challenge. What happens if you rewatch every Peeta scene, assuming he's the sharpest strategist in the room and not just the boy with the bread? On a rewatch, you don't start with, is this romantic? You start with, here's the real question. What is Peeta trying to make other people feel or believe right now? Take the first interview with Caesar. At face value, the crush confession is a cute TV moment. On a second pass, pause and ask, whose behavior does this lock in? Sponsors, game makers, Katniss, Snow, the entire district audience. Everyone is suddenly invested in a story he chose. This is where we talk about rooftop Peeta. Go back to that scene before the games, when he says he wants to die as himself. The first time, you read it as vulnerability. On rewatch, track his word choices. Why bring up identity, performance, and the games as a show right before they go in? He's telling you his operating system. Note how calm his tone is how he's already framing the arena as a stage he intends to manipulate. Next prompt: every time Peeta is in front of a crowd, hit mental record. The reaping, the train, the parade, the interviews, the victory tour speeches in District 11 and beyond, the proposal on live TV. Watch his eyes, not just his smile. Who is he scanning? How often does he answer a question with a story instead of a direct response? There is a lot to uncover here about how he reads a room faster than anyone else in the narrative. Now, track the moments where he lets himself be misunderstood. When he joins the careers, when he downplays his own skills, when he insists Katniss is the real rebel. Ask, what does he gain from letting people underestimate him? That part matters because misunderstanding becomes a shield. If the Capitol thinks he's soft, they don't see the threat until the narrative has already shifted. If you want a concrete mini-fandom project, build a Peeta self-sacrifice map. Every time he offers himself up, telling Haymitch to focus on keeping Katniss alive, throwing the bread to a starving girl, taking a beating in District 11, volunteering for the Quarter Quell, staying in the Capitol's hands, write down the scene, then map the ripple. Which alliances form, which districts get hope, which Capitol narratives crack. Suddenly, selfless Peeta turns into long game Peeta reshaping the board. And here's the promise of this rewatch. You're not just spotting clever moves, you're honoring a victor whose brilliance the story hides behind frosting and charm. Once you start asking these questions, it becomes impossible not to see the relationship between his public performances and the rebellion's survival. Keep that lens ready, because next we're going to cover specific scenes where his strategy doesn't just protect Katniss, it rewires the games themselves. So, was Peeta Mellark playing the long game? Final verdict. So when you zoom out from all those little moments we've been tracking, you start to see something uncomfortable. Peeta Mellark is not just stumbling through on pure emotion. He's running a very specific campaign, not for president, for the story. The bread in the rain is the opening move. At face value, it's pure compassion from a baker's boy to a starving girl behind the pig pens. But that part matters because it proves two things. One, he's willing to pay a cost, his mother's rage, for someone else's survival. And two, he understands how a single gesture can live rent-free in someone's memory for years. That is long game thinking in the currency of relationship. Fast forward to the Crush confession interview. On paper, it's impulsive, a shy boy blurting out his feelings on national television. But here's the real question. Why do it there, in that format, with that audience? By tying his "I've had a crush on you" to Caesar Flickerman's stage, he doesn't just tell Katniss, he forces the Capitol to package them as a set. Sponsors, game makers, Snow himself now have to think of them as a unit. He's not just surviving the games, he's editing the games. Then we hit the proposal and the baby bomb. Again, you can read those scenes as Snow script, Peeta playing along to keep District 12 safe. There is a lot to uncover here, because he's doing both. He leans into the romance hard enough that killing them becomes bad television. That's the definition of the long game we've been using. Consistently making choices with an eye toward narrative, legacy, and public perception, not just, how do I get through tonight? This is where we talk about the moral speeches too. In the arena, on the victory tour, in interviews, Peeta keeps planting lines about not being a piece in their games, about the value of every district life, about the cost of war. Those aren't random mood swings. They're on-brand messaging. Even when he's hijacked, his recovery arc is framed around choosing what is real, what story he believes about Katniss, about himself, about the Capitol. Broken as he is, he's still fighting on the battlefield he's always favored. The narrative won. Now, can you point to moments that feel impulsive or purely emotional? Absolutely. The way he throws the metal ball in training, the way he yells at Haymitch, the way he begs Katniss to run when he's dying in the arena. But when you stack the bread, the crush confession, the proposal and baby announcement, the speeches, and even the way he claws his way back from hijacking, a pattern appears. Emotion is the fuel. Strategy is the steering wheel. So was Peeta Mellark playing the long game? Yes. Not in the sense of a 4D chessboard where he predicts every quarter-quell twist, but in the sense that he repeatedly thinks several moves ahead in the arena of hearts and minds. And that's exactly why the rebellion ends the way it does, not with another arena, another spectacle of death, but with a meadow and a promise that the story can change. Because once you win the narrative, the Capitol's games are already over. Your turn in the arena, comment prompts and fandom debates. So now that we've watched Peeta quietly win the narrative war, we have to turn the arena lights on you. If he's playing the long game from the reaping to the meadow, here's the real question. Where do you think the strategy stops and the emotion starts? Take his biggest swings. The "I've had a crush on you" interview, the decision to team up with the careers, the berries, the proposal on the victory tour. Do you read any of those as purely emotional outbursts, or is there always a calculation humming underneath? Point to a specific scene. Is it the rooftop conversation about dying as myself? Is it the beach in Catching Fire when he hands Katniss the locket and tries to sacrifice himself? Tell us which moment, at face value, feels raw and unscripted to you, and then tell us whether you still believe that after everything we're going to cover in this video. This is where we talk about the tiny Peeta moments too. The hand squeeze before they go up in the tubes. The way he throws bread to a starving girl in the rain years before the games. The way he learns to paint Rue's portrait in the training center. What's the most underrated Peeta beat that suddenly looks different once you assume he's thinking months, even years ahead? There is a lot to uncover here. Maybe it's a single line in the cave. Maybe it's how he uses self-deprecation on Caesar's couch to disarm the entire Capitol audience. And we should argue about the uncomfortable part. Is there a line where his long game turns into manipulation of Katniss herself? When he pushes the romance in interviews, when he proposes on camera, when he keeps insisting she should live instead of him, does that cross into using her trauma for strategic reasons, even if he loves her? How do you feel about that ethically? Is he a victim of the Capitol's script? Or is he an active writer of it who sometimes writes over her consent? Book readers, this is your arena too. Which version of Peeta feels more like a mastermind to you, and why? The books give us his rooftop philosophy, his talent for reading crowds, his careful speeches on the victory tour, his choice to argue on air with Caesar after hijacking. The films streamline a lot of that. So does movie Peeta still read as a strategist in your headcanon, or does the mastermind live mostly on the page for you? Think of the comments as our own Victor's Village Square, a little cluster of victors from every district arguing about strategy long after the cameras have cut and the Capitol has moved on. Whose read on Peeta's long game are you backing, and whose are you ready to challenge? Because in the next section, we're stepping into his most controversial move of all, and the fandom is still split on what it really meant. Closing from Victor's Village. Stay for more games analysis. So, if our little Victor's Village debate square is still going in your head, here's the real question. Where do you go next if you want to keep pulling at the threads of Panem's design? Because this channel lives in that space. We're going to cover the games not just as a deadly arena, but as a long-term system, Snow's architecture of control, Coin's cold math, Haymitch's secret rebellion network running under the floorboards, and of course Peeta Mellark quietly playing the longest game in the room. If you're here, it's probably because you don't just want to know who wins. You want to know why the Capitol built the board this way in the first place. At face value, you can finish this video and walk away thinking, Peeta was smart, moving on. But that part matters because it connects to a much bigger question. What happens when two different tyrants try to weaponize the same hope? If you want to see that relationship pulled apart, the next stop I'd send you to is our breakdown of Snow versus Coin. On paper, they're enemies. In practice, they're running eerily similar games with different branding. In that video, we go through Snow's roses, Coin's grey jumpsuits, the execution vote, and why Katniss's final arrow is less a twist and more the only move that makes sense once you understand how the system is rigged. If you've been in the comments arguing about whether Coin was better than Snow, that's where we talk about the real cost of trading one kind of controlled hope for another. Or, if your brain is still stuck on Peeta's long game, there is a lot to uncover here in Haymitch's story. Check out the Haymitch Rebellion Network deep dive. We trace the quiet phone calls, the mentor meetings, the missing years between his quarter quell and Katniss's reaping. You start to see how a drunk in a decaying Victor's Village house becomes the architect of an underground alliance that spans multiple districts and multiple games. If this is the kind of Panem analysis you want more of, where we treat every interview, every train ride, every whispered conversation on a rooftop as part of a larger strategy, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next Victor's Village report. Turn on notifications if you want the Capitol alert system version of that. Without the Capitol. We're going to cover more on propaganda, on why the Victory Tour is basically a weapon pointed at the districts, and on how victors keep rewriting the rules even when the cameras think the story is over. If you've been here for the earlier breakdowns, the quarter quell twist, the Tesserae economy, the way District 12's village survives the bombing, you're already part of this ongoing argument we're building together. You bring the questions, the what if Peeta meant this theories, the why would Snow risk that threads. We bring the receipts from the text and the films. So as you head to the next video, keep one thing in mind. In Panem, the loudest threats are rarely the most dangerous. It's the quiet ones at the edge of the frame, the boy with the bread, the victor in the back row, the mentor on the phone, who might be the ones rewriting the games. And Peeta Mellark, he was never just surviving them. He was changing them, one move at a time.